The Persian arrows are falling like deadly rain around you, and your horse Bucephalus is breathing hard beneath your weight. You're 22 years old, covered in dust and blood that isn't entirely your own, and you're about to do something so monumentally stupid that even your closest friends think you've lost your mind. You're going to charge directly into the center of the Persian army, alone. Well, not entirely alone. You've got 30,000 Macedonians behind you, but they might as well be 1,000 miles away, because right now, in this moment, it's just you, your horse, and King Darius III of Persia, staring at each other across a battlefield that stretches to the horizon. This is Gaugamela. This is the battle that will either make you the ruler of the known world, or turn you into a very attractive corpse for the vultures. And as you lower your lance and dig your heels into Bucephalus's flanks, one thought flashes through your mind. Your tutor Aristotle definitely didn't prepare you for this in philosophy class, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before you become Alexander the Great, conqueror of empires and crusher of dreams, you have to start as Alexander the Small, prince of a kingdom most people couldn't find on a map if their lives depended on it. So let's rewind a bit, shall we? Tonight we're diving into the remarkable, bloody, and occasionally completely insane life of Alexander the Great, the Macedonian prince who conquered most of the known world before his 30th birthday, and then had the audacity to die young, leaving behind an empire so vast that his generals spent the next 50 years fighting over the pieces like dogs with a particularly large bone. From his unconventional upbringing in the wild mountains of Macedonia to his final breath in a palace in Babylon, Alexander's story is one of ambition, brilliance, and the kind of reckless courage that makes you wonder if he was genuinely fearless or just really, really bad at math. So before we begin this journey together, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy diving deep into history's most fascinating characters. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. There's something magical about knowing we're all scattered across the globe, sharing stories of someone who walked the earth over 2,000 years ago. Now settle in, maybe dim the lights, perhaps put on some soft background music, and let's ease into tonight's adventure together. Your story begins in 356 BCE, on a summer night when the temple of Artemis at Ephesus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, mysteriously burns to the ground. The priests will later claim this happened because the goddess was too busy attending your birth to protect her own temple. Whether you believe in omens or not, it's a pretty dramatic way to enter the world, even by royal standards. You're born in Pella, the capital of Macedonia, a kingdom that most Greeks consider barely civilized. Think of Macedonia as the ancient equivalent of that rough neighborhood everyone talks about but no one wants to visit. Your neighbors to the south in Athens and Sparta look at Macedonians the way city folks might look at mountain people, suspicious, slightly afraid, and definitely convinced you're all a little too fond of drinking, fighting, and doing both at the same time. Your father is Philip II, and calling him ambitious would be like calling a hurricane a bit breezy. Philip is the kind of man who looks at maps the way other people look at restaurant menus. Everything seems appetizing, and he wants to try it all. He's spent most of his adult life turning Macedonia from a collection of feuding tribes into something resembling an actual kingdom, and his idea of diplomacy usually involves explaining his position with the sharp end of a spear. Your mother, Olympias of Epirus, is, well, she's complicated. Imagine if intensity were a person, gave that person a crown, and then added a healthy dose of religious fervor and a tendency to settle disputes with poison. Olympias doesn't just worship the gods, she has personal conversations with them, particularly Dionysus, the god of wine and madness. She keeps snakes as pets, not metaphorically, but actual snakes that slither around the palace like scaly courtiers. Some nights you fall asleep to the sound of your mother talking to serpents in the next room, which probably explains a lot about your future relationship with normal behavior. Your parents' marriage is less a love story and more a strategic alliance held together by mutual ambition and the occasional death threat. They fight like wild animals, make up like passionate lovers, and then fight again over breakfast. Growing up in this household is like living inside a thunderstorm that occasionally pauses to serve dinner. But here's the thing about being born into chaos. It either breaks you or it forges you into something unbreakable. And you, little Alexander, are definitely being forged. Your childhood doesn't exactly fit the typical royal pattern. While other princes are learning to embroider and compose poetry, you're learning to ride horses bareback and throw spears with enough force to punch through armor. Your father believes that a soft prince makes a dead king, so your education includes lessons in pain tolerance, strategic thinking, and the fine art of making grown men do what you want through a combination of charisma and barely contained violence. By the time you're 7, you can ride any horse in the royal stables except one, a massive black stallion that no one can touch without risking their limbs. The horse is beautiful, powerful, and absolutely psychotic. Trainers have given up on him. Your father's considering having him put down, but you watch this horse, really watch him, and you notice something everyone else has missed. The horse isn't crazy. He's afraid of his own shadow. So one day, while the adults are arguing about what to do with the beast, you walk right up to him. Slowly, carefully, you turn him toward the sun, so his shadow falls behind him, instead of in front of where he can see it. Then, before anyone can stop you, you swing yourself onto his back. The silence that follows is the kind you hear right before either a miracle or a catastrophe. But the horse doesn't buck, he doesn't bite. He stands perfectly still for a moment, as if he's thinking, and then he starts to walk, then trot, then run, like the wind itself has gotten tired of being slow. Your father watches this display with the expression of a man who's just realized his son might be either a genius or completely insane. Possibly both. When you finally bring the horse back, Philip does something he rarely does. He smiles, not the political smile he uses on ambassadors, but a real smile, the kind that reaches his one good eye. "My boy," he says, and his voice carries across the courtyard. "You must find a kingdom equal to yourself, for Macedonia is too small for you. You name the horse Bucephalus, Oxhead, because subtlety has never been your strong suit. But the horse becomes more than just your mount. He becomes your partner, your confidant, the one creature in the world who understands your need for speed, for space, for something larger than the confines of any palace. And somewhere in the back of your young mind, a seed is planted. If you can tame the untamable, if you can see solutions where others see only problems, then maybe, just maybe, there really isn't a kingdom large enough to contain you. By the time you turn 13, it becomes clear that the usual royal education isn't going to cut it. You've already outpaced your tutors in mathematics. You can recite Homer's Iliad from memory. Your favorite part is where Achilles drags Hector's body around Troy, which probably says something about your developing personality. And you've started questioning military strategies with the confidence of someone who's never actually been in a real battle, but absolutely believes he could do better. Your father decides you need a teacher who can match your rather extraordinary mind, so he does what any reasonable king would do when faced with an intellectually gifted but slightly terrifying teenage son. He hires the smartest man in the known world. Enter Aristotle. Aristotle arrives at your court like a walking library with opinions. He's already famous throughout Greece as a philosopher, scientist, and the kind of person who can explain why the sky is blue, and then launch into a 3-hour discussion about the nature of blueness itself. He's studied under Plato. He's written books on everything from politics to poetry, and he has the confident air of someone who's never met a question he couldn't answer with at least 4 different theories. Your father sets up a private school for you and a handful of other noble boys in the gardens of Mieza, a peaceful sanctuary away from the noise and politics of court. It's here, under olive trees that have been growing since before your grandfather's grandfather was born, that your mind truly begins to take shape. Aristotle doesn't just teach you facts, he teaches you how to think. He shows you that every problem can be broken down into smaller parts, analyzed and solved through logic and observation. He introduces you to the idea that knowledge isn't just power, it's the ultimate weapon, sharper than any sword and more lasting than any conquest. But here's what makes your education different from every other prince who's ever lived. Aristotle doesn't just teach you philosophy and science. He teaches you practical politics, military strategy, and the psychology of leadership. He explains how to read people, how to inspire loyalty, how to make decisions when every choice could mean life or death for thousands. A king, Aristotle tells you one afternoon as you sit by a stream, watching the water flow around stones, must be like water, strong enough to carve through mountains, flexible enough to flow around obstacles, and essential enough that everything dies without it. You absorb these lessons like dry earth absorbs rain, ethics, logic, natural science, rhetoric. You devour it all, but you don't just memorize it, you adapt it, twist it, make it your own. When Aristotle teaches you about different forms of government, you don't just learn about democracy and tyranny, you start imagining how you might rule differently, better, more completely than anyone has before. Your fellow students are smart enough, but they approach learning like it's a chore to be endured. You approach it like it's a weapon to be mastered. While they're debating the finer points of Plato's Republic, you're thinking about how those theories might apply to actual conquest, actual empire building, actual world changing. Aristotle notices this difference. One evening, as the sun sets over the gardens of Mieza, he pulls you aside. "Alexander," he says, and there's something almost cautious in his voice, "you have a mind that could reshape the world. But remember, the tools that build empires can also destroy them. Wisdom without restraint becomes madness. Power without purpose becomes tyranny." You nod politely, but inside you're thinking, what's wrong with a little madness, as long as it's directed properly? 3 years pass in this bubble of learning and preparation. 3 years of having your mind stretched, challenged and sharpened to a razor's edge. When you finally return to court at 16, you're no longer just a prince with potential. You're a young man with the intellectual tools to analyze any problem, the rhetorical skills to convince anyone of anything, and the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you can think circles around most adults. Your father takes one look at you and realizes something that probably keeps him awake at night. His son has just become the most dangerous person in Macedonia and the most valuable, because while you were studying philosophy and science with Aristotle, the world outside has been getting more complicated. The Greek city-states are as fractious as ever. Persia looms like a storm cloud to the east, and Macedonia sits right in the middle of it all, like a wolf among sheep, hungry, powerful, and trying to decide which direction to strike first. Your real education is about to begin. And this time, the classroom is going to be a battlefield. At 16, while most teenagers are trying to figure out whether they're brave enough to talk to the cute merchant's daughter at the market, you're solving military crises that have been giving your father's generals nightmares. Welcome to royal adolescence, where your growth spurts are measured in conquered territories, and your rebellious phase involves actual rebellion. It starts with the Maiadi, a Thracian tribe that has decided Macedonia's northern border is more of a suggestion than an actual line. They've been raiding Macedonian settlements, stealing cattle, burning farms, and generally making the kind of nuisance of themselves that requires a military response. Your father's advisors suggest sending a proper army with experienced commanders, adults who've actually fought in wars before. Philip looks at the map, looks at his advisors, and then looks at you. "Alexander," he says with the casual tone of someone asking you to pass the wine, "how would you handle this?" You study the situation for about 30 seconds, just long enough to be polite, and then lay out a strategy that's so simple and so brutal that the room falls silent. You don't want to just defeat the Maiadi. You want to make an example of them that will keep every other border tribe quiet for the next decade. "Give me a regiment," you say, "and I'll bring you their king's head." Most fathers would pat their son on the head and suggest he stick to hunting rabbits. Philip hands you command of a regiment and tells you not to come back without results. You march north with 4,000 Macedonian soldiers, who are probably wondering what they did to deserve being commanded by someone who can't legally drink wine yet. But you don't march like a teenager playing at war. You march like someone who's spent 3 years learning from the smartest man in the world, and who understands that this is your audition for something much bigger. The campaign is swift, brutal, and devastatingly effective. You don't just drive the Marti back, you crush them so thoroughly that their neighbors start sending tribute just to make sure you don't turn your attention their way. You found a city on the site of their former stronghold and name it Alexandropolis because modesty has never been your strongest trait. When you return to Pella, you're no longer Philip's son who shows promise. You're Philip's son who delivers results. The difference is crucial, because in Macedonia, potential gets you invited to dinner. Results get you invited to plan the next war, and there's definitely going to be a next war. Your father has been nursing an ambition that most people would call impossible. He wants to unite all of Greece under Macedonian leadership and then invade the Persian Empire. This is roughly equivalent to a modern small country deciding to conquer the entire United States and then invade China for dessert. The Persian Empire stretches from the Mediterranean to India, commands millions of soldiers and has enough gold to buy most of the known world twice over. But Philip isn't most people, and neither are you. While other kings dream small, maybe conquering a neighboring city-state or securing a trade route, the two of you sit up late into the night, surrounded by maps and wine cups, planning how to remake the entire world. The Persians are vast, Philip explains, pointing to territories that seem to stretch beyond the edge of the known world. But vastness can be a weakness. They're spread thin, their governors are corrupt, and their army relies on subjects who have no love for their Persian masters. You study the maps, absorbing every detail. Mountain ranges that could hide armies, rivers that could be crossed or defended, cities that could be conquered or converted. Your mind works like a vast calculating machine, processing logistics, strategy, politics and psychology all at once. We'll need the Greeks united first, you say, tracing lines on the map with your finger. No point conquering Persia if Athens and Sparta are ready to stab us in the back. Philip grins. His son isn't just brave, he's thinking like a true strategist. Exactly, and that means Thebes, you finish. If we break Thebes, the rest will fall in line. Thebes is the current dominant power among the Greek city-states, and they've been making it very clear that they don't appreciate Macedonia's growing influence. They've formed alliances, built armies, and sent ambassadors throughout Greece warning that Philip is a barbarian who threatens Greek independence. They're not entirely wrong, but they're about to discover that being right and being able to do something about it are two very different things. The campaign against Thebes becomes your advanced education in real warfare. This isn't a border skirmish with raiders, this is a proper war against professional soldiers, led by experienced generals who have every intention of killing you before you can grow up to become a problem. Your father gives you command of the left wing of the Macedonian army, a position of honor and tremendous responsibility. You're 18 years old, commanding seasoned warriors against the finest military force in Greece, and the fate of your father's entire strategy rests on your ability to not just fight, but to win decisively. The Battle of Charonea becomes the moment when you stop being a promising prince and start being something the world has never seen before. You don't just defeat the sacred band of Thebes, an elite unit that has never been broken in battle. You annihilate them so completely that Greek military experts will spend the next century trying to figure out exactly how you did it. Your tactics are unconventional, brutal, and absolutely brilliant. While the Theban generals are expecting traditional Greek fighting, careful formations, honorable single combat, the whole civilized approach to warfare, you hit them with something that's part Macedonian pragmatism, part Aristotelian logic, and part pure creative violence. When the dust settles and the screaming stops, Thebes is finished as a military power. The other Greek city-states look at the corpse-strewn battlefield and collectively decide that maybe Macedonian leadership isn't such a bad idea after all. You walk through the aftermath of Charonea like a young god of war. Your armor is dented, your sword is notched, and there's blood in your hair that probably isn't yours, but you're not celebrating, you're learning. Every fallen enemy, every tactical success, every moment of the battle gets filed away in your mind for future reference, because this was just practice. The real war, the war that will make or break everything you and your father have planned, is still waiting across the Hellespont in the vast golden empire of Persia. And as you clean your sword and prepare for the journey home, you allow yourself one small smile. The world is about to find out what happens when you give a kingdom to someone who was never meant to be contained by borders. Just as your father Philip stands on the brink of launching his great invasion of Persia, just as all the pieces of his grand strategy are falling into place, fate decides to remind everyone that history has a twisted sense of humor, and that reminder comes in the form of a blade in the dark, wielded by someone your father trusted. It's 336 BCE, and Philip is celebrating the wedding of your sister Cleopatra to Alexander I of Epirus. The ceremony is taking place at Aegi, the ancient capital of Macedonia, in a festival that's meant to showcase Macedonian power and prosperity to representatives from across the Greek world. Your father is at the height of his power. Greece is under his control. His plans for Persian invasion are nearly complete, and his son, that's you, has proven himself a capable military commander. Everything is perfect, which in hindsight should have been a warning sign. The assassin is Pausanias, one of your father's own bodyguards, a man who's supposed to die before letting anyone harm the king. But Pausanias has a grievance, a personal humiliation that's been festering like an infected wound. The details are messy, involving accusations and insults, and the kind of court politics that make palace life a constant minefield of wounded egos and dangerous grudges. Pausanias strikes during the morning procession, when Philip is walking into the theatre unarmed and unarmored, trusting in the protection of his guards and the sanctity of the occasion. One thrust of a blade, and 23 years of careful planning, brilliant strategy, and ruthless ambition die in a spreading pool of blood on ancient stones. You're 20 years old when you become King Alexander III of Macedon, not Alexander the Great. That title is still waiting to be earned through rivers of blood and mountains of conquest. Right now you're just Alexander the Sudden, Alexander the Unprepared, Alexander the Holy Shit Now What? The news of Philip's death spreads through the Greek world like wildfire, and the reactions are swift and predictable. In Athens, the orator Demosthenes literally dances in the streets calling for a celebration of the tyrant's death. In Thebes, the survivors of Chaeronea start sharpening their swords and talking about revenge. Throughout Greece, in every city that has been forced to bow to Macedonian power, people start wondering if maybe this is their chance to break free. Your father's advisors look at you with expressions that range from hopeful to terrified. You're young, you're untested as a ruler, and you've just inherited an empire that's held together by fear, respect for Philip's military genius, and the understanding that rebellion means death. Without Philip, some of them are wondering, what's to stop the whole carefully constructed house of cards from collapsing? You look around the room at these doubting faces. Men who've served your father faithfully for years but who clearly aren't sure if they should pledge loyalty to his son or start making plans to flee to Egypt. And in that moment you make a decision that will define everything that follows. You don't mourn, you don't hesitate, you don't call for councils or committees or long discussions about the best course of action. You act. Gentlemen, you say, and your voice carries the same quiet authority that your father's did. My father is dead. I am king. Anyone who has a problem with this arrangement is welcome to discuss it with my army. It's not a request. It's not a negotiation. It's a statement of fact delivered with the kind of confidence that makes grown men remember that this particular 20-year-old has already proven he can kill professionally trained soldiers without breaking a sweat. Within days, you've consolidated power in Macedonia and sent messages to every Greek city-state informing them that their alliance with Philip now extends to his son, and that any attempt to break that alliance will be considered an act of war. Some comply immediately. Others decide to test whether the young king is as dangerous as his father was. They're about to find out that you're not just as dangerous as Philip, you're something entirely new, something that combines his strategic brilliance with a speed and ruthlessness that leaves your enemies gasping to keep up. Thebes, still nursing grudges from Chaeronea, declares independence and besieges the Macedonian garrison in their city. It's meant to be a symbolic gesture, a way of testing your resolve and inspiring other cities to rebellion. You respond by marching south with an army so fast that you arrive at the gates of Thebes before most people have even heard that you've left Macedonia. The siege is broken in a matter of hours, and what follows is a lesson in brutality that makes your father's conquests look like polite diplomatic negotiations. You don't just defeat Thebes, you erase it. The city that has stood for centuries, that has produced poets and philosophers and warriors, is reduced to rubble and ash. Every building is torn down, except the temples and the house where the poet Pindar once lived, because even in your rage you're not quite barbarian enough to destroy great art. The population is sold into slavery, the land is distributed to your allies. When the dust settles, Thebes simply no longer exists as a political entity. It's as if you've taken an eraser to the map of Greece and rubbed out one of its most important cities. The effect on the rest of Greece is immediate and absolute. Every city-state that was considering rebellion suddenly remembers urgent business that requires their complete attention. Athens sends ambassadors bearing gifts and assurances of eternal friendship. Sparta decides that discretion is the better part of valor and quietly reaffirms their alliance with Macedonia. Within 6 months of your father's death, you've not only held together his empire, you've made it clear that challenging the new king is roughly equivalent to committing elaborate suicide. But you're not done. While your enemies are still reeling from the destruction of Thebes, while your allies are still trying to figure out exactly what kind of king they're dealing with, you do something that leaves everyone speechless. You announce that you're going to finish what your father started. The invasion of Persia isn't cancelled or postponed, it's accelerated. You're going to cross into Asia, defeat the largest empire in the world, and claim the crown that has belonged to Persian kings for 2 centuries. Your advisors think you've lost your mind. You're 20 years old, you've been king for less than a year, and you want to invade an empire that commands millions of soldiers and more gold than exists in all of Europe combined. Your Majesty, one of them ventures carefully. Perhaps we should consolidate our position in Greece first, maybe spend a few years strengthening our defenses, building up our treasury. Durand grand. You look at him with the expression of someone who's just been told that fire is hot and water is wet. Antipater, you say, my father spent 20 years preparing for this invasion. Every battle we've fought, every alliance we've made, every strategy we've developed has been aimed at this moment. The Persians think Philip's death means the threat is over. They're wrong. You stand up and walk to the great map that dominates one wall of the throne room, the same map your father used to plan his campaigns, now marked with your own additions and annotations. We march for Asia in the spring, you announce. 35,000 men, enough cavalry to break any force that opposes us, and enough engineers to tear down any wall that stands in our way. The room falls silent. These are experienced men, veterans of Philip's campaigns, and they know military reality when they see it. 35,000 men against the entire Persian Empire is not a war. It's an extremely expensive form of suicide. But as they look at you, standing there in front of the map with absolute confidence radiating from every line of your body, some of them start to remember something important. They remember that this is the young man who defeated the sacred band of Thebes, who destroyed an entire city in a matter of days, who has never, not once, failed to achieve exactly what he said he would achieve. And slowly, one by one, they begin to nod. Not because they think the plan is reasonable, but because they're starting to suspect that maybe, just maybe, reason doesn't apply to you. Maybe the impossible is just another word for something you haven't done yet. The spring of 334 BCE finds you standing on the shore of the Hellespont, the narrow stretch of water that separates Europe from Asia, staring across at the land that will either make you the ruler of the world or provide you with a very exotic grave. Behind you, 35,000 of the finest soldiers ever assembled wait for your command. Ahead of you lies the Persian Empire, vast as an ocean and twice as dangerous. This is it, the moment your entire life has been building toward. All those years of training, of study, of proving yourself in battle, they've all led to this stretch of water that's barely a mile wide, but might as well be the distance between one world and another. Your generals are nervous, though they're trying not to show it. Parmenion, your father's most experienced commander, has spent the last week reviewing supply lists and questioning whether 35,000 men are enough to conquer an empire that can field armies 10 times that size. Your cavalry commanders keep checking and rechecking their equipment. Your engineers are muttering about logistics and questioning the wisdom of invading Asia without secure supply lines back to Macedonia. You, on the other hand, are practically vibrating with excitement. While your officers worry about practical details like food and reinforcements, you're thinking about something entirely different. You're thinking about Achilles. Homer's Iliad has been your favorite book since childhood, and now you're about to follow in the footsteps of the greatest warrior in all of literature. Just like Achilles crossed these same waters to fight at Troy, you're crossing to fight for something even greater. Not just a single city, but an entire world. The night before the crossing, you do something that will be remembered for thousands of years. You sail ahead of your army to the Trojan coast, alone except for a small group of companions. There, on the beach where Achilles and Hector once fought their legendary duel, you perform sacrifices to the heroes of the past and make promises to the gods about the heroes you intend to create. You find what the locals claim is Achilles' tomb, and you run naked around it 3 times because apparently even world conquerors have to maintain certain traditions. Then you place a crown on the grave and declare that just as Achilles had his faithful friend Patroclus, you have your beloved companion Hephaestion to share in your glory. It's all very dramatic, very romantic, and very calculated to spread exactly the right rumors. By morning, every soldier in your army has heard that their young king believes himself to be the new Achilles, blessed by the gods and destined for immortal glory. Some of them think this is inspiring. Others think it's the kind of thing you say right before you get everyone killed. Most of them are too busy trying not to vomit from seasickness to care much either way. The actual crossing is almost anticlimactic. You expect Persian ships, Persian resistance, maybe a few arrows shot from the Asian shore. Instead, you find nothing but empty beaches and curious locals who seem more interested in trading goods than fighting armies. The Persian Empire, it turns out, has made a crucial mistake. They've decided that you're not worth taking seriously. Just another barbarian prince from the edge of the world, probably planning to raid a few coastal cities and then go home with whatever loot you can carry. Their local governors have pulled back to more defensible positions, confident that you'll exhaust yourself against their fortified cities and then retreat back to Europe with your tail between your legs. They're about to learn that you don't do anything halfway, including invasions. Your first target is the city of Troy itself, or rather what's left of it. The original Troy of Homer's poems has been ruins for centuries, but there's a small city called Ilion built on the same site. You could bypass it easily, but that would miss the point entirely. You want to make a statement. You want every person in Asia to understand that this isn't just a military campaign, it's the beginning of a new age. So you conquer Ilion, not because you need to, but because the symbolism is too perfect to ignore. The heir of Achilles has returned to finish what the Greeks started 1,000 years ago. From Troy, you march inland toward your first real challenge, the Persian army waiting for you at the Granicus River. This isn't some minor garrison or hastily assembled militia. This is a proper Persian force commanded by experienced generals, equipped with the finest weapons the empire can provide, and positioned in a strong defensive location. Your scouts report that the Persians have taken position on the far side of the river, using the water as a natural barrier and the steep banks as defensive walls. It's a smart strategy. Force the Macedonians to cross under fire, hit them while they're struggling to climb out of the water, and turn the river red with barbarian blood. Your generals suggest waiting, finding a better crossing point, maybe even negotiating. After all, this is your first major battle in Asia. A defeat here would end your invasion before it really begins. You listen to their concerns with the patience of someone who's already made up his mind, and then you explain your strategy with the calm confidence of someone discussing the weather. We attack at dawn, you say. Direct assault across the river. The silence that follows is the kind you hear right before people start questioning your sanity. Your Majesty, Parmenion ventures carefully. The Persians are expecting exactly that. They're positioned to slaughter anyone who tries to cross the river in front of them. You smile, and it's not entirely reassuring. Good, let them expect it. Expectations can be a weakness if you know how to exploit them. You don't elaborate, partly because you enjoy keeping people guessing, and partly because your strategy is so simple it's almost insulting. While the Persians are focused on defending the obvious crossing point, you're going to do something that no sensible commander would attempt. You're going to charge straight into their strongest position and win through sheer audacity and superior training. It's not a strategy that would work for anyone else. But you're not anyone else. You're Alexander, student of Aristotle, son of Philip, and you've never met a problem that couldn't be solved with the right combination of intelligence and overwhelming violence. Dawn breaks grey and misty over the Granicus River, and as the sun burns off the fog, 2 armies face each other across water that will run red before the day is done. On one side, the flower of Persian nobility and their allied Greek mercenaries, confident in their position and certain that these Macedonian barbarians are about to learn a hard lesson about civilized warfare. On the other side, you and 35,000 of the most disciplined, best trained and most motivated soldiers the world has ever seen, men who've followed you across half of Greece, who've seen you turn defeats into victories and problems into opportunities, and who've started to believe that maybe, just maybe, you really are blessed by the gods. You don't waste time with elaborate rhetoric or appeals to honor and glory. You simply ride to the front of your formation, look across the river at the waiting Persians, and shout the only order that matters: Macedonia, and then you charge. The Battle of the Granicus River becomes the template for everything that follows. You don't fight like a king safely positioned behind the lines, directing the battle from a comfortable distance. You fight like Achilles reborn, leading from the front, your armor shining in the morning sun as you crash into the Persian ranks like a force of nature made flesh. Your cavalry follows you into the river, horses struggling against the current, while arrows rain down from the Persian positions. Men scream, horses neigh, metal rings against metal, and the water turns pink with blood. For a moment, just a moment, it looks like the Persians might actually hold their position. Then you break through. It happens so fast that even your own men have trouble following it. One moment you're struggling to climb the muddy riverbank under a hail of spears and arrows. The next you're carving through Persian cavalry like a scythe through wheat. Your swordwork so precise and deadly that enemies simply fall away from you. The Persians have never seen anything like it. They're used to fighting Greeks who favor careful formations and measured advances. They're prepared for barbarian charges that rely on brute force and fury. What they're not prepared for is someone who combines perfect technique with absolute fearlessness, who can read a battlefield like a scholar reads a book and then reshape it through pure violence. You cut down the Persian general Mithridates in single combat, your spear punching through his armor like he's wearing silk instead of bronze. Behind him, the Persian line wavers, then breaks, then collapses entirely as your Macedonian cavalry pours through the gap you've created. The battle becomes a rout. Persian soldiers who moments before were confident in their superior position now find themselves fighting for their lives against an enemy who seems to be everywhere at once. Some try to retreat across the river, others throw down their weapons and beg for mercy. A few, the bravest or most foolish, continue fighting until your men cut them down. When the dust settles, you're standing knee-deep in the Granicus River, your armor dented and blood-stained, surrounded by the bodies of men who underestimated what 35,000 Macedonians could accomplish when properly motivated. The Persian dead include most of their cavalry commanders and a significant portion of their noble officers, men whose deaths will be felt throughout the empire. But you're not celebrating. Not yet. Because while this victory is satisfying, it's also just the beginning. The real Persian army, the forces commanded by King Darius himself, is still out there, somewhere beyond the horizon. This was just a taste, an appetizer before the main course. Your men, however, are ecstatic. They've just defeated a Persian army that outnumbered them, and they've done it with losses so light that some units barely have wounded to tend. As they strip armor from the dead and count captured weapons, you can see the change in their faces. When they crossed the Hellespont, they were following their king on what might have been a glorious suicide mission. Now they're following Alexander the Conqueror, and suddenly the impossible doesn't seem quite so impossible anymore. You send the captured Persian armor back to Athens as an offering to the goddess Athena, along with an inscription that reads, Alexander, son of Philip, and the Greeks accept the Lacedaemonians from the barbarians dwelling in Asia. It's a masterpiece of political messaging, claiming credit for Greece while simultaneously insulting Sparta for not participating in the campaign. But more importantly, it's a declaration to the world that you're not just raiding the edges of the Persian Empire, you're here to stay, and you're here to win. From the Granicus, you march south along the Aegean coast, liberating Greek cities that have been under Persian control for generations. Sardis opens its gates without a fight. Ephesus welcomes you as a liberator. City after city falls into your hands, not through siege and slaughter, but through a combination of military intimidation and political brilliance. You understand something that most conquerors miss. People don't just submit to force, they submit to the promise of something better. So instead of treating these cities as conquered territories, you treat them as allies, liberated from Persian oppression. You restore their traditional governments, reduce their taxes, and promise to respect their local customs and religions. Every city that joins you willingly is one less siege you'll have to conduct, one less garrison you'll have to leave behind, one more source of supplies and reinforcements for the campaigns ahead. But it's also a demonstration of something revolutionary. Conquest doesn't have to mean destruction. It can mean improvement. Of course, not everyone is impressed by your enlightened approach to empire building. The city of Halicarnassus, ruled by the Persian satrap Orontobates and defended by the Greek mercenary captain Memnon, decides to test whether your reputation for invincibility extends to siege warfare. They're about to discover that you didn't spend all those years studying with Aristotle just to learn philosophy. You also learned engineering. Halicarnassus is a fortress city built on a peninsula and protected by walls that have stood for centuries. The harbor is fortified, the approaches are narrow, and the defenders include some of the finest professional soldiers in the Persian Empire. Taking it by storm would cost thousands of lives and probably fail anyway. So you don't take it by storm, you take it apart, piece by piece, with the methodical precision of a craftsman dismantling a watch. Your siege engines are marvels of engineering, towers that rise higher than the city walls, catapults that can hurl boulders the size of oxen, and battering rams that can punch through stone like it's clay. But more than that, you've brought something even more dangerous: patience and intelligence. While your engines pound the walls, your engineers dig tunnels beneath them. While your archers keep the defenders' heads down, your spies spread rumors and bribes throughout the city. This isn't just a military siege, it's a comprehensive assault on every weakness Halicarnassus might have. The siege drags on for weeks, then months. Each day brings new innovations, new tactics, new attempts to find the key that will unlock the city's defenses. Your men begin to mutter that maybe this time you've bitten off more than you can chew, that maybe not every problem can be solved with cleverness and determination. Then, one night in late autumn, a section of wall undermined by your tunnels simply collapses. The sound echoes across the harbor like thunder, and suddenly there's a gap in Halicarnassus's defenses wide enough to march an army through. The assault that follows is swift and merciless. Your Macedonians pour through the breach like a flood, overwhelming the defenders before they can organize a proper response. Memnon and his remaining forces retreat to the citadel, and then escape by sea, leaving the city in your hands. Standing in the ruins of Halicarnassus, watching smoke rise from the conquered city, you allow yourself a moment of satisfaction, not because of the victory itself, that was inevitable once you committed to the siege, but because of what it represents. You've just proven that Persian defenses, no matter how strong, can be broken by Macedonian determination. But even as your men celebrate and count the spoils, your mind is already moving ahead to the next challenge. Because somewhere to the east, beyond the mountains and deserts of Anatolia, King Darius III is gathering the largest army the world has ever seen, and when that army finally moves, it won't be to defend cities or hold mountain passes, it will be to crush you completely. Winter finds you in the city of Gordium, an ancient capital that has seen empires rise and fall for 1,000 years. It's here that you encounter one of the strangest challenges of your career, a knot. Not just any knot, of course. This is the legendary Gordian knot, tied by the ancient king Gordius and secured to his chariot with such complexity that no one has been able to untie it for centuries. Local legend claims that whoever unties the knot will become master of all Asia, exactly the sort of prophecy that gets your attention. Your men gather around as you examine the knot, expecting you to spend hours working at it with the patience of a philosopher. The knot is indeed a masterpiece of complexity, with ropes woven together in patterns so intricate that it's impossible to see where they begin or end. You study it for perhaps 30 seconds, long enough to understand the problem, and then you draw your sword, one clean stroke, and the Gordian knot falls to the ground in pieces. There, you announce to the stunned crowd, it's untied. Some people call this cheating, others call it brilliance, you call it practical problem solving. Sometimes the most elegant solution is also the most direct one, and anyone who thinks there's only one way to approach a challenge has probably never had to conquer an empire on a tight schedule. But the real significance of the Gordian knot isn't the method you use to solve it, it's the message it sends. Throughout Asia, people hear the story and understand its meaning. Alexander doesn't just follow rules, he rewrites them. Traditions that have stood for centuries mean nothing to him if they get in the way of his objectives. The psychological impact is enormous. Persian commanders who were already nervous about facing you in battle now have to worry about whether you'll follow any of the conventional rules of warfare. Local populations that might have resisted your advance start to wonder if opposing someone who can casually destroy ancient prophecies is really such a good idea. As spring arrives and campaign season begins again, you receive intelligence that changes everything. Darius isn't just gathering an army, he's gathering the army. Every satrap, every subject nation, every ally and vassal of the Persian Empire has been ordered to contribute troops to a force that will supposedly number over 1 million men. Your spies bring reports that sound like fever dreams. Cavalry units from the steppes where horses are born, war elephants from India, scythe chariots from the eastern provinces, and elite guards whose armor is worth more than most kings' treasuries. Darius is apparently planning to settle the question of who rules Asia by bringing so many soldiers that you'll simply be buried under the weight of numbers. Your generals are impressed despite themselves. Parmenion, ever practical, starts doing calculations about supply lines and wondering how you're supposed to fight an army that's 30 times larger than your own. You, on the other hand, are almost excited, because while everyone else is focusing on the size of Darius's army, you're thinking about its composition. An army of 1 million men drawn from dozens of different nations, speaking different languages, following different customs, commanded by generals who probably spend more time plotting against each other than planning strategy. It's not an army, you explain to your council one evening as you study the latest intelligence reports. It's a mob with expensive equipment. Your strategy for dealing with this mob is characteristically direct. You're going to march into the heart of Anatolia, force Darius to come to you, and then teach the King of Kings what happens when quantity meets quality. On a battlefield where intelligence matters more than numbers, the march into central Anatolia becomes a masterclass in military logistics and psychological warfare. You move fast, faster than any Persian commander expects, living off the land and leaving no sign of where you'll strike next. Your army becomes a ghost, appearing where the enemy doesn't expect it, vanishing before they can respond, always moving deeper into Persian territory. Persian garrisons find themselves cut off and surrounded. Supply convoys disappear into the mountains. Local governors send increasingly frantic messages to Darius, begging for reinforcements that never come because you're moving too quickly for the Persian command structure to respond. By the time summer arrives, you've effectively conquered the western half of Anatolia without fighting a single major battle. Not through siege or slaughter, but through speed, intelligence, and the kind of strategic thinking that turns geography into a weapon. But you know this game of cat and mouse can't continue forever. Eventually, Darius will finish gathering his massive army and come looking for you with enough force to level mountains. When that happens, you'll need to be ready for the kind of battle that decides the fate of empires. The question is, where? You find your answer in a small coastal town called Issus, where the mountains come down almost to the sea, creating a narrow coastal plain that will force even the largest army to fight on a front small enough for your superior tactics to matter. It's perfect, so perfect that you almost suspect the gods of setting up the chessboard for your convenience. The news comes to you on a bright morning in November. Darius and his great army have finally moved. They're marching along the coast, looking for you, confident that when they find you they'll have enough men to simply overwhelm whatever resistance you can offer. What they don't know is that you've been waiting for them. What they don't know is that you've chosen the ground where you'll make your stand. And what they definitely don't know is that you've already won this battle in your mind a dozen times over. You order your men to prepare for the fight of their lives, and as you watch them check their weapons and armor, you feel that familiar tightness in your chest. Not fear, but anticipation. The kind of feeling a hunting hawk must have when it spots prey far below. Somewhere beyond the horizon, 1 million Persian soldiers are marching toward their destiny. They think they're coming to crush a barbarian upstart who's gotten too big for his britches. They're wrong. They're coming to witness the birth of a legend. The Persian army that approaches Issus in November of 3033 BCE is the largest military force the world has ever seen assembled in one place. Darius has summoned warriors from every corner of his empire, immortals from Persia proper, cavalry from Media, archers from Babylon, infantry from Egypt. The column stretches for miles, so vast that it takes days just to pass any given point. Your scouts bring you reports that border on the impossible. 1,000,000 men, they say, maybe more. Enough cavalry to darken the sky with arrows. War elephants that tower above the ranks like moving mountains. The personal guard of the King of Kings, armored in gold and convinced of their own invincibility. Any reasonable commander would take one look at these numbers and start planning a strategic withdrawal to more defensible positions. You, however, have never been accused of being reasonable. Instead, you do something that will be talked about for the next 2,000 years. You write a letter to Darius himself. The letter is a masterpiece of psychological warfare, disguised as diplomatic correspondence. You address him not as King of Kings or Lord of Asia, but simply as Darius, as if he were just another local governor who'd gotten a bit above himself. You politely explain that he's invading your territory. Asia apparently belongs to you now, and you graciously offer to accept his surrender if he's willing to acknowledge you as his rightful superior. The response that comes back is everything you could have hoped for. Darius is furious, insulted, and so eager to crush you personally that he's apparently willing to fight on whatever ground you choose rather than wait for a more advantageous position. Perfect. The Battle of Issus unfolds like a deadly dance choreographed by the gods themselves. You position your forces across the narrow coastal plain, with the sea on one flank and the mountains on the other, turning Darius's numerical advantage into a liability. He can't deploy most of his enormous army because there simply isn't room, like trying to fight with a spear in a closet. Your formation is a work of art. The Macedonian phalanx in the center, bristling with sarissas, those 18-foot spears that turn infantry into a walking forest of death. Your cavalry on the flanks, ready to exploit any weakness in the Persian line. And you, mounted on Bucephalus at the head of your companion cavalry, positioned to strike wherever the battle hangs in the balance. Darius, meanwhile, has positioned himself behind his forces in a war chariot, so elaborate it looks more like a mobile throne room than a battlefield command post. He's surrounded by his immortals, protected by enough bodyguards to defend a small city, and apparently convinced that his mere presence will inspire his troops to victory. He's about to learn that battles aren't won by the most impressive chariot. The fighting begins at dawn with a clash that can be heard for miles. Your phalanx advances like a machine, each man moving in perfect synchronization with his neighbors, their spear points creating a wall of bronze death that no amount of Persian courage can break through. But the real breakthrough comes when you spot your opportunity, a gap in the Persian line where one of their units has been forced to redeploy to meet your cavalry charge. It's not a large gap, maybe 50 yards at most, but it might as well be a highway for someone with your tactical vision. You gather your companion cavalry and point them at the gap like a spear aimed at a heart. Macedonia, you shout, and 30,000 voices answer you as you charge. What follows is 18 minutes of pure, concentrated violence that reshapes the ancient world. You smash through the Persian line like a thunderbolt, your cavalry cutting down everything in its path as you drive straight toward the spot where Darius sits in his magnificent chariot. The King of Kings sees you coming, sees this dust-covered barbarian prince cutting through his elite troops like they're children playing at war. And for the first time in his life, Darius experiences something he's never felt before. Genuine, bowel-loosening terror. You're perhaps 100 yards away when Darius does something that will haunt him for the rest of his life. He runs, abandons his chariot, abandons his army, abandons any pretense of royal dignity, and flees the battlefield like a common soldier who's lost his nerve. The effect on the Persian army is immediate and catastrophic. When the King of Kings runs away, what's to stop everyone else from doing the same? The retreat becomes a rout. The rout becomes a massacre, and within hours an army of 1,000,000 men has been scattered to the winds. You pursue them for miles, cutting down stragglers and capturing treasure wagons, until finally you call off the chase and return to survey your victory. The battlefield is littered with Persian dead, abandoned equipment, and enough gold to fund your campaign for the next several years. But the real prize isn't the treasure or even the strategic victory. It's what you find in Darius's abandoned camp, his family. Persian custom dictates that the great king travels with his entire household, which in Darius's case includes his mother, his wife and his daughters. They're sitting in a magnificent tent, surrounded by enough luxury to furnish a palace, waiting to learn whether they're about to be ransomed, enslaved or killed. You walk into that tent still covered in battle dust, your armor dented and your sword bloody, and you do something that shocks everyone present. You treat them with perfect courtesy. You bow to Darius's mother, Sisygambis, and assure her that she'll be treated with the respect due to a queen mother. You promise his wife that her honor will be protected and her status maintained. You tell his daughters that they'll continue to live as befits Persian princesses. It's a calculated act of mercy, of course. Treating the Persian royal family well sends a message throughout the empire that surrender to Alexander doesn't mean destruction, it means improvement. But it's also something more than calculation. Standing in that tent, looking at these terrified women who represent everything noble about Persian civilization, you realize that you're not just conquering an empire, you're inheriting one. And if you're going to rule these people effectively, you need to understand them, respect them, and convince them that your reign will be better than what came before. The news of ISIS spreads across the ancient world like wildfire. But it's not just the military victory that captures people's imagination, it's the manner of victory. A 23-year-old Macedonian king has defeated the largest army ever assembled, not through superior numbers or better equipment, but through pure tactical brilliance and personal courage. More importantly, he's done it while treating his defeated enemies with honor rather than brutality. Suddenly, the terrifying barbarian from the north starts to look less like a conqueror and more like a liberator. Egyptian priests begin comparing you to the pharaohs of old. Babylonian astronomers consult their charts and declare that the stars favor your cause. Even in Persia itself, provincial governors start quietly considering whether their future might be brighter under Macedonian rule than under a king who abandons his army at the first sign of trouble. But you're not resting on your laurels. While the world marvels at your victory, you're already planning your next move. Because defeating Darius's army was just the beginning. If you want to claim the Persian crown for yourself, you'll need more than military victories. You'll need to prove that you're not just a conqueror, but a legitimate heir to the greatest empire the world has ever known. Your next target isn't another army, or even another king. It's a city that has never fallen to any conqueror in its 700-year history. A fortress so impregnable that attacking it is considered the ancient equivalent of committing suicide. You're going to besiege Tyre. The island city of Tyre sits half a mile offshore from the Lebanese coast, connected to the mainland by nothing but open water and supreme confidence in its own invincibility. For 7 centuries, Tyre has been the greatest naval power in the Mediterranean, its fleets carrying trade goods from Spain to India, its walls rising directly from the sea like a man-made cliff that no army can scale. Every great conqueror in history has looked at Tyre and decided that some prizes aren't worth the cost. The Assyrians tried to take it and failed. The Babylonians besieged it for 13 years and achieved nothing but frustration. The Persians have simply left it alone, content to collect tribute rather than attempt the impossible, which is exactly why you're going to do it. Your generals look at Tyre and see an impregnable fortress defended by the finest navy in the world. You look at Tyre and see a puzzle that no one has been clever enough to solve. The city's strength, its island position, is also its weakness. Cut off from the mainland, it's dependent on supply ships and fishing boats for everything from food to fresh water. We'll build a causeway, you announce to your engineering staff, as if you're suggesting adding a room to a house rather than attempting to move mountains into the sea. The silence that follows is the kind you hear when professional experts realize their boss has just suggested something that violates several laws of physics. Your Majesty, one of your engineers ventures carefully. The water between the mainland and Tyre is... We're talking about moving enough earth and stone to build a mountain. You've already thought of that. Then we'll build a mountain. What follows is one of the most audacious engineering projects in human history. For months, your entire army becomes a construction crew, moving tons of earth, stone and timber to create a bridge across half a mile of open ocean. It's back-breaking, mind-numbing work that continues day and night regardless of weather, enemy action, or simple human exhaustion. The Tyrians think you've lost your mind. At first, they just watch from their walls, amused by the spectacle of an army trying to fill in the sea. Then, as your causeway slowly but steadily advances toward their city, amusement turns to concern, then to desperate action. They send ships to attack your workers. You build protective screens and keep building. They drop boulders into the water to disrupt your construction. You work around them and keep building. They launch fire ships to burn your equipment. You replace it and keep building. Month after month, the causeway grows. What started as an impossible dream slowly becomes an inevitable reality. The gap between mainland and island shrinks from half a mile to a quarter mile to a few hundred yards. And then, one morning in July of 332 BCE, your workers drive the final stakes into place, and Tyre is no longer an island. It's a peninsula, connected to the mainland by a bridge of earth and stone and Macedonian determination. The assault that follows is swift and merciless. Your siege engines roll across the causeway like mechanical monsters, battering down walls that have stood for centuries. Your soldiers pour into the city that has never fallen, and by sunset the banner of Macedonia flies from Tyre's highest tower. Standing on those walls, looking out at the causeway that will remain for thousands of years as a testament to what human will can accomplish, you allow yourself a moment of quiet satisfaction, not because you've conquered another city, but because you've just proven something important to the world. There is no problem that can't be solved if you're willing to work hard enough and think creatively enough. There is no fortress so strong that Macedonian ingenuity can't find a way through it, and there is no challenge so great that Alexander will turn away from it simply because it seems impossible. The fall of Tyre sends shockwaves throughout the ancient world. If Alexander can conquer the unconquerable city, what's to stop him from conquering everything else? Persian governors throughout the Levant and Egypt begin sending ambassadors bearing tribute and offers of submission. But more than that, the siege demonstrates something revolutionary about your approach to warfare. You don't just overcome obstacles, you eliminate them permanently. That causeway will remain for millennia, turning Tyre from an island fortress into a mainland port that any future army can reach. You're not just winning battles, you're rewriting geography. From Tyre, you march south toward Egypt, and with each mile the character of your campaign changes. You're no longer fighting your way through hostile territory. You're processing through lands that see you as a liberator, a divine king come to free them from Persian oppression. The Egyptians have never liked their Persian overlords, who have ruled Egypt as just another province in their vast empire, showing little respect for Egyptian religion, culture, or ancient traditions. When you cross the border with your army, Egyptian priests come out to meet you, not with weapons but with flowers and incense. At Memphis, the ancient capital, you're crowned Pharaoh of Egypt. In a ceremony that dates back 3,000 years, you make the proper sacrifices to Egyptian gods, show respect for their temples, and promise to rule as a true pharaoh rather than a foreign conqueror. It's all very flattering, but the real prize isn't the crown or the ceremony. It's what Egypt represents, the wealth of the Nile, the grain that can feed your army, and the strategic position that controls the southern approach to Persia. More than that, it's the legitimacy. By accepting the pharaoh's crown, you've added Egyptian divine kingship to your growing collection of titles. You're no longer just Alexander of Macedon, or even Alexander, king of Asia. You're Alexander the god king, heir to the pharaohs, chosen by the gods themselves to rule. But even as you accept the honors and tribute of Egypt, your mind is already moving ahead to your next objective. Somewhere to the east, Darius is gathering another army, probably larger than the one you crushed at Issus. Persian gold is flowing to mercenary captains throughout the Mediterranean, raising forces that will try to cut your supply lines and trap you in Egypt. You need to end this war decisively, and that means finding Darius and defeating him so completely that the Persian Empire simply collapses under its own weight. The problem is that Persia is vast, and Darius has learned from his mistakes. He won't be lured into another narrow battlefield, where your tactical superiority can negate his numerical advantage. The next time you meet, it will be on ground of his choosing, with every advantage he can muster, which is exactly what you're counting on. before you leave Egypt to hunt the King of Kings, you do something that will outlast every battle you've ever fought and every city you've ever conquered. On the Nile Delta, at a spot where the river meets the sea, you lay out the plans for a new city, not just any city, the greatest city the world has ever seen, a place where Greek learning meets Egyptian wisdom, where Asian trade routes converge with Mediterranean shipping lanes, where scholars and merchants and artists from every corner of the known world can gather to create something entirely new. You call it Alexandria. Naturally, modesty has never been your strongest trait. As you walk the perimeter where your city will rise, marking locations for harbors and temples and libraries, you're thinking far beyond the immediate needs of your campaign. You're thinking about the world you want to create after the wars are over, after Persia is conquered, after the map has been redrawn in Macedonian ink. This city will be your legacy, the place where your vision of a unified world can take physical form. Egyptian engineers working alongside Greek architects, Persian scholars debating with Macedonian philosophers, Indian mathematicians sharing knowledge with Babylonian astronomers. It will be magnificent, it will be eternal, and it will ensure that even if every statue of you crumbles to dust, even if every song about your victories is forgotten, the world will remember that Alexander was here. But first, you have a war to finish. The march north from Egypt feels different from all your previous campaigns. For the first time, you're not advancing into unknown territory or gambling on untested strategies. You know exactly where you're going and exactly what you need to do when you get there. Darius has chosen to make his stand at Gargamella, a flat plain in northern Mesopotamia, where he can deploy his massive army without the geographical constraints that doomed him at Issus. Your spies report that he's assembled an even larger force this time, perhaps 2 million men drawn from every corner of the empire, equipped with new weapons designed specifically to counter Macedonian tactics. Scythe chariots that can carve through infantry formations, war elephants trained to trample cavalry, cavalry from the eastern steppes mounted on horses bred for speed and endurance, elite guards whose armor has been reinforced against Macedonian spears. It's an impressive display of Persian resources and determination. It's also exactly what you've been hoping for, because while Darius has been gathering his enormous army, you've been thinking about how to destroy it. And the solution, as always, is elegantly simple. You're going to give him exactly the battle he wants, on exactly the ground he's chosen, and then you're going to demonstrate why tactics matter more than numbers. Your army has grown since Egypt, reinforced by allies and mercenaries who want to be on the winning side of history, but you're still outnumbered by at least 10 to 1, possibly 20 to 1. By any reasonable calculation, the Battle of Gargamella should be a massacre. It is, just not the massacre Darius is expecting. The night before the battle, you do something that surprises even your closest friends. You sleep, not the restless half-sleep of a nervous commander, but the deep, peaceful sleep of someone who has already fought this battle a dozen times in his mind and knows exactly how it will end. Chompendant Sive, your generals are less confident. Parmenion spends the night reviewing battle plans and checking equipment. Your cavalry commanders make final adjustments to their formations. Even Hephaestion, your closest companion, seems nervous about the odds you'll be facing. You wake up refreshed, alert, and eager to get started, because today isn't just another battle. Today is the day you claim the Persian Empire for yourself, crown and all. The Battle of Gaugamela begins before dawn on October 1st, 3031 BCE, with the kind of elaborate ritual that befits the clash of empires. Darius has positioned his enormous army across the plain like a golden carpet studded with bronze and steel. His war chariots gleam in the early light. His elephants trumpet challenges to the sky. His cavalry forms a line that stretches to the horizon. You deploy your forces with the precision of a master craftsman arranging his tools. The Macedonian phalanx in the center, solid as a granite cliff and twice as deadly. Your cavalry on the flanks, positioned to exploit whatever opportunities the battle creates. And you, mounted on Bucephalus at the head of your companion cavalry, wearing armor that has been polished to mirror brightness for this, the greatest performance of your life. The two armies face each other across a plain that will soon be soaked with blood. and for a moment, just a moment, there's absolute silence. 200,000 men holding their breath, waiting for the signal that will decide who rules the world. Then Darius gives the order, and his scythe chariots thunder toward your lines like mechanical death incarnate. This is the moment he's been planning for, the weapon that's supposed to break your formations and leave your infantry helpless before his cavalry charge. The chariots race across the plain with their blades spinning, aimed at the heart of your phalanx like spears thrown by a giant. But you've been expecting this. Your men open ranks at precisely the right moment, creating corridors for the chariots to pass through harmlessly. The few that actually strike your formations are brought down by carefully aimed spears and then swarmed by infantry, who strip them of crew and horses. Within minutes, Darius's secret weapon has been neutralized, and now it's your turn. You wait for the perfect moment, the instant when the Persian line is fully committed to their assault and can't easily reposition, and then you launch your masterstroke. Not a frontal assault that would play to Persian strength, but an oblique attack that hits their line at an angle, concentrating all your force against a narrow section of their front. It's like using a hammer to drive a nail. Your cavalry punches through the Persian line, then wheels to roll up their flank, while your phalanx advances to prevent any organized resistance. The Persian army, so magnificent in formation, begins to collapse like a house of cards. Units that were confident moments before find themselves attacked from unexpected directions. Commanders who thought they had the battle under control discover that their orders can't reach their troops through the chaos. And through it all, you lead from the front, always visible, always pressing the attack wherever resistance is strongest. Your men follow you, not just because you're their king, but because you're their champion, the one man in the army who seems immune to fear, doubt, or anything resembling reasonable caution. The breakthrough comes when you spot Darius himself, once again positioned behind his troops in a chariot that serves more as a symbol than a command post. But this time, instead of running immediately, the King of Kings tries to rally his troops for one last stand. You point Bucephalus toward that chariot like an arrow aimed at the heart of the Persian Empire. Macedonia, you shout, and your voice carries across the battlefield even through the noise of combat. The charge that follows is the stuff of legend. You and your companion cavalry carve through Persian elite guards like a blade through silk, leaving a trail of dead and dying that points straight toward the man who calls himself the ruler of the world. Darius sees you coming, sees this young barbarian covered in other men's blood, mounted on a horse that seems to breathe fire, leading warriors who fight like demons, and once again royal courage fails him. But this time, his flight is even more catastrophic than at Issus, because this time, the entire Persian army sees their king abandon them to face the Macedonian wolves alone. The retreat becomes a rout, the rout becomes a stampede, and by noon, an army of 2 million men has simply ceased to exist as an organized force. You pursue them until your horses are exhausted, and your men can barely hold their weapons, capturing treasure that would fund a dozen kingdoms and prisoners whose ransoms will keep your army supplied for years. But the real prize isn't gold or captives. It's the realization that settles over the ancient world like morning mist. There is no power on earth that can stand against Alexander. The Persian Empire, which has dominated the known world for 2 centuries, has been broken by a 24-year-old Macedonian king who refuses to accept that anything is impossible. Standing on the field of Gaugamela, as the sun sets over the greatest victory in military history, you're no longer Alexander of Macedon. You're not even Alexander the Conqueror. You're Alexander the Great, and the world is your kingdom. But victory, you're about to discover, can be more dangerous than defeat, because when you've conquered everything there is to conquer, when you've achieved everything you set out to achieve, the question becomes, what do you do for an encore? The answer, as it turns out, is simple. You keep going until you run out of world. In the aftermath of Gaugamela, the Persian Empire doesn't so much collapse as it simply dissolves. Like a sandcastle hit by a wave, the structure that has dominated the ancient world for 2 centuries crumbles overnight into constituent parts that scatter in every direction. Persian taps, Persian firestorps send messengers racing to your camp, each trying to be the first to offer submission and tribute. Cities that have never seen a Macedonian soldier open their gates and declare themselves liberated. Provincial governors who spent decades collecting taxes for Darius suddenly discover an urgent desire to collect taxes for Alexander instead. But the real prize, the symbol that will transform you from conqueror to legitimate emperor, is still out there somewhere. Darius himself has escaped once again, fled north toward his ancestral homeland with a handful of loyal guards and whatever portable wealth he could grab before his army evaporated around him. More importantly, he still wears the crown of the King of Kings, and until that crown sits on your head instead of his, you're just another successful warlord. The difference between conquest and legitimacy is often smaller than people think, but it's the difference between ruling an empire and ruling a rebellion. So you do what you've always done when faced with a problem. You march toward it with overwhelming force and absolute confidence. But first you have some ceremonial business to attend to. The city of Babylon, the ancient capital of Mesopotamia and one of the greatest cities in the world, sends ambassadors to meet you while you're still mopping up Persian stragglers from Gargamella. They don't come with weapons or defenses. They come with flowers, incense, and offers of submission so complete, they might as well be handing you the keys to the city. The Babylonians, like the Egyptians before them, have no love for Persian rule, and they see you as a liberator rather than a conqueror. Your entry into Babylon is less a military occupation and more a religious procession. The priests of Marduk greet you as a chosen king. The city's astronomers consult their charts and declare that the stars have ordained your victory. Even the common people line the streets to cheer your arrival, throwing flower petals and shouting your name in a dozen different languages. You process through streets that are wider than most cities, past buildings that tower into the sky like man-made mountains, toward the ziggurat at the city's heart, where Babylonian kings have been crowned for 1,000 years. The sheer scale of it all is breathtaking. This is a city that makes Athens look like a village and makes Pella seem like a collection of mud huts. But what impresses you most isn't the architecture or the wealth, it's the sophistication. Babylonian mathematicians have been calculating the movements of planets since your ancestors were learning to count on their fingers. Their engineers have built irrigation systems that turn desert into garden. Their merchants trade with kingdoms so distant that their names sound like myths. This is what an empire should look like. Not just conquered territory ruled by force, but a network of cities and cultures that enhance each other, that create something greater than the sum of their parts. Standing in the throne room of Nebuchadnezzar's palace, accepting the homage of Babylonian nobles who prostrate themselves before your throne, you make a decision that will define the rest of your reign. You're not going to rule these people as subjects. You're going to rule them as partners, which means adapting yourself to them as much as forcing them to adapt to you. You begin studying Persian customs, learning to speak their language, understanding their religion and their concept of divine kingship. You adopt Persian court dress for official ceremonies, not because you've gone native, but because symbolism matters. When Persian nobles see you wearing their traditional robes, performing their traditional rituals, they don't see a foreign conqueror, they see a legitimate heir to their ancient throne. Your Macedonian companions are less enthusiastic about these changes. Parmenion and the older generals mutter about barbarian customs corrupting good Macedonian values. Some of your cavalry officers openly question whether their king is becoming too Persian for his own good. You listen to their complaints with the patience of someone who understands their concerns but knows they're missing the bigger picture. You're not becoming Persian, you're becoming something new, something that can unite East and West under a single crown. But you also understand that some of your men will never accept this vision. They followed you to conquer the Persian Empire, not to become part of it. The question is whether you can hold their loyalty long enough to complete your transformation from Macedonian king to world emperor. The answer comes sooner than you expect, and it comes in the form of betrayal. Babylon, you march north in pursuit of Darius, following intelligence reports that place him somewhere in the mountains near Ecbatana. Your army moves with the confidence of victors, loaded down with Persian treasure, and convinced that the war is essentially over. All that remains is to capture the last Persian king and formally claim his crown. But as you advance deeper into the Persian heartland, the character of your campaign begins to change. These aren't Egyptian farmers grateful for liberation. or Babylonian merchants eager for new trading partners. These are Persian nobles fighting for their ancestral homeland, mountain tribes who've never submitted to any foreign power, and soldiers who see surrender as dishonor worse than death. The resistance isn't organized enough to threaten your army directly, but it's persistent enough to be dangerous. Supply convoys disappear in mountain passes. Scouts sent to reconnoiter valleys never return. Local guides lead your forces into ambushes and then vanish into landscapes they've known since childhood. It's guerrilla warfare, asymmetric conflict, the kind of fighting that favors knowledge of terrain over military superiority. And for the first time since you left Macedonia, you find yourself fighting an enemy that can't be defeated in a single decisive battle. Your men begin to grumble. They signed up to conquer an empire, collect their share of Persian gold, and return home as heroes. They didn't sign up for an endless campaign against invisible enemies in hostile mountains, where victory is measured in miles gained rather than armies destroyed. The grumbling gets worse when word reaches you that Darius is dead. He wasn't killed in battle or executed by your forces. He was murdered by his own men, Persian nobles led by Bessus, the satrap of Bactria, who decided that a living Darius was more liability than asset. They killed their own king, probably hoping that his death would end the war and allow them to negotiate some kind of settlement with you. They couldn't have been more wrong. When you find Darius's body abandoned by the roadside, still wearing the robes of the King of Kings but stripped of his crown and royal ornaments, you don't celebrate. You grieve, publicly, dramatically, and with every appearance of genuine sorrow. Not because you loved Darius, you barely knew him, but because his murder has robbed you of something crucial. You needed to defeat him yourself, to take his crown in honorable combat, to be seen as his rightful successor, rather than just another usurper who happened to have a bigger army. Instead, these Persian rebels have turned you into something much more dangerous, an avenger. You give Darius a royal funeral, complete with Persian ceremonies and Macedonian honors. You swear by all the gods that his murderers will pay for their crime, and you make it clear to every Persian noble and tribal leader within 1,000 miles that anyone who supported Bessus's rebellion has forfeited not just their property and position, but their lives. The message is simple. You didn't come to Persia to destroy it. You came to inherit it. And anyone who prevents that inheritance from proceeding peacefully will discover exactly why they call you Alexander the Great. The hunt for Bessus takes you into some of the most forbidding terrain on earth. Bactria and Sogdiana, modern Afghanistan and Uzbekistan, are lands where empires come to die, where the geography itself seems designed to break armies and humble kings. These are mountains that reach toward the clouds, deserts that stretch beyond the horizon, river valleys so remote that the people who live there have never heard of Greece or Persia or any power beyond their own tribal chiefs. It's a landscape that has swallowed whole civilizations and turned their bones into dust, that blows across endless steppes. Your men look at this country and see exile, punishment, a place where they'll spend the rest of their lives fighting people who can't be conquered and defending territory that isn't worth holding. They joined your army to get rich and famous, not to freeze in mountain passes chasing bandits who fade away like smoke whenever you get close to them. But you look at these same mountains and valleys and see something entirely different. The edge of the world, the final frontier, the place where Alexander the Great will prove that there truly are no limits to Macedonian ambition. Besides, you have a personal score to settle with Bessus. The man has declared himself the new King of Kings, taken the royal name Artaxerxes V, and started gathering support from tribes that see him as the last hope of Persian independence. In other words, he's committed the ultimate crime. He's made himself your rival. That simply cannot be allowed to stand. The campaign in Bactria becomes a masterclass in adaptation and persistence. You can't defeat these people with traditional battlefield tactics, because they won't give you traditional battles. Instead, they melt away whenever you approach, striking at your supply lines and disappearing into terrain so broken that pursuit is nearly impossible. So you change the rules. You divide your army into smaller, more mobile columns that can move quickly through mountain passes and desert wadis. You recruit local guides and allies who know the country. You establish a network of fortified bases that can support each other and gradually extend your control into previously inaccessible regions. Most importantly, You demonstrate the same combination of mercy and ruthlessness that served you so well in the Western satrapies. Tribes that submit are treated with honor and allowed to keep their traditional leaders. Tribes that resist are crushed so completely that their neighbors think twice about defying you. It takes 2 years, but eventually the net closes around Bessus. His tribal allies abandon him one by one, either bought off with Macedonian gold or intimidated by Macedonian steel. His strongholds fall to siege engines that shouldn't be able to operate in such terrain, but somehow do, because Macedonian engineers don't believe in impossible. When you finally capture the last claimant to the Persian throne, you do something that sends a message to every corner of your growing empire. You don't simply execute him. That would be too quick, too merciful for someone who murdered his rightful king. Instead, you hand him over to Persian nobles for judgment according to their own laws. The trial is swift, and the verdict unanimous. Bessus is guilty of regicide, rebellion, and sacrilege. The punishment, according to ancient Persian custom, is to be torn apart by horses in the public square of Ecbatana, while crowds cheer and priests proclaim the justice of the gods. You watch the execution with the same calm expression you might use to observe a military drill, not because you enjoy violence but because you understand symbolism. Every Persian noble who sees Bessus die understands that you're not just another foreign conqueror. You're the legitimate heir to the Persian throne, and you're willing to uphold Persian law, even when it means watching a man die in the most horrific way possible. But your men, your good solid Macedonian veterans, watch the execution with expressions of disgust and growing alarm, because this isn't how Macedonians settle disputes. This is barbarian justice, foreign cruelty, the kind of thing that civilized men shouldn't participate in, even when it serves their strategic interests. For the first time since you left Pella, you sense real discontent in the ranks, not the usual grumbling about pay or rations or the length of the campaign, but something deeper and more dangerous, doubt about whether their king is still the man they swore to follow. It comes to a head during the winter of 3028 BCE, in the city of Maracanda, during what should have been a celebration of your victories in Sogdiana. You're hosting a symposium, a drinking party for your senior officers, a chance to relax and bond after months of brutal mountain warfare. The wine flows freely, as it always does at these gatherings. Stories are told, songs are sung, and gradually the conversation turns to the topic that's been simmering beneath the surface for months: your adoption of Persian customs, and your insistence on being treated with the kind of divine reverence that Persians show their kings. Cleitus the Black, one of your oldest friends and most trusted cavalry commanders, has been drinking heavily and brooding even more heavily. He's the man who saved your life at the Granicus River, cutting down a Persian noble who was about to split your skull. He's fought beside you in every major battle since you crossed into Asia. If anyone has earned the right to speak freely to you, it's Cleitus, which makes what happens next even more tragic. The conversation starts innocently enough, with someone praising your tactical brilliance and comparing your victories to those of the legendary heroes. But then Cleitus, his words slurred with wine and bitterness, makes a comment that stops the party cold. "Heroes," he says, his voice carrying across the sudden silence. "What heroes? Philip conquered Greece and planned this whole campaign. Alexander's just following his father's playbook with Persian decorations." The room goes dead quiet. You can hear the wind outside, the distant sound of sentries calling to each other, the nervous breathing of men who suddenly realize they're witnessing something that could end very badly. You stare at Cleitus, your oldest friend, the man who saved your life, and for a moment your face shows nothing at all. Then very quietly, you ask him to repeat what he just said. Cleitus, either too drunk or too angry to recognize the danger, not only repeats his words but elaborates on them. "Philip was the real genius," he says. "You're just a boy playing dress-up in barbarian clothes, demanding worship from men who should be your equals, forgetting that you're Macedonian, not some Persian god-king." The words hit you like physical blows, not because they're necessarily wrong. Philip was a brilliant king and a loving father, but because they're being said here, now, in front of Persian nobles and foreign allies who need to believe that you're divinely ordained to rule them. More than that, they're being said by someone whose opinion actually matters to you. You can dismiss criticism from politicians and flatterers, but Cletus fought beside you when you were nobody special, when you were just Philip's ambitious son with dreams too big for his kingdom. The argument escalates with the terrible inevitability of Greek tragedy. Other officers try to intervene, to calm things down before they go too far. But you and Cletus are beyond reason now. Two proud men made reckless by wine and wounded friendship. When Cletus calls you a tyrant who's forgotten his roots, you do something that will haunt you for the rest of your life. You grab a spear from one of your guards, and in a rage that's part fury and part heartbreak, you drive it through your oldest friend's chest. Cletus dies instantly, blood spreading across the floor of the symposium hall, while 20 of your most senior officers watch in stunned silence, and suddenly the room is full of ghosts. Not just Cletus, but every friend you've lost, every bridge you've burned, every piece of yourself you've sacrificed on the altar of ambition. You stand there holding a bloody spear, looking down at the body of a man who loved you enough to tell you the truth, and for the first time in your life you understand the real cost of becoming a legend. The aftermath of Cletus's death nearly destroys you. For 3 days you lock yourself in your private chambers, refusing food, refusing visitors, refusing to see anyone except the priest who comes to perform purification rituals. Your officers wait outside, unsure whether their king is grieving, planning, or simply losing his mind. When you finally emerge, you're changed. Not broken, you're far too strong for that, but marked in a way that everyone can see. You've crossed a line that can never be uncrossed, killed a friend in a moment of rage, and proved that even Alexander the Great is capable of human weakness. But you're also still the king, still the conqueror, still the man who's never lost a battle or failed to achieve an objective, and you still have an empire to build. The campaign continues, deeper into the mountains, further from anything that could reasonably be called civilization. You're chasing rumors now, following reports of rebellious tribes and independent kingdoms that exist at the very edge of the known world. Your men follow you because they're professional soldiers and you're their commander, but the easy camaraderie of the early campaigns is gone. They look at you differently now, not with less respect, but with a kind of wariness that wasn't there before. They've seen what happens when someone pushes you too far, and none of them want to be the next Cletus. It's during this period of isolation and introspection that you meet Roxane. She's the daughter of a Sogdian nobleman named Oxyates, a man who's been leading resistance against your forces in the northern mountains. When you finally corner him in his supposedly impregnable fortress, he surprises you by offering surrender and his daughter's hand in marriage. Roxane is beautiful, certainly, with the dark eyes and golden skin of the eastern provinces, but more than that, she represents something you desperately need, a bridge between your Macedonian past and your Persian future, a symbol of the unity you're trying to create between East and West. Your generals are horrified, bad enough that you've adopted Persian customs and started demanding prostration from your subjects. Now you want to marry a barbarian princess and potentially produce heirs who are only half Macedonian. It's a step too far, even for men who followed you to the edge of the world. But you understand something they don't. If you're going to rule an empire that stretches from Macedonia to India, you need to be more than just a Macedonian king. You need to be a bridge between cultures, a living symbol of the unity that you're trying to create. The wedding is a political masterstroke disguised as a romantic gesture. Persian nobles see you honoring their customs by taking a wife according to their traditions. Your Macedonian officers see you securing an important alliance and neutralizing a potential source of rebellion. Everyone gets to interpret the marriage in whatever way makes them most comfortable. But privately, in the quiet moments between campaigns and ceremonies, you discover something unexpected. You actually like Roxane. She's intelligent, spirited, and unimpressed by your reputation in a way that you find refreshing. When she looks at you, she doesn't see Alexander the Great, conqueror of empires. She sees Alexander, a young man far from home, who's trying to hold together something too large for any one person to control. It's a perspective you hadn't realized you needed until you found it. The marriage doesn't end the grumbling among your officers, but it does something more important. It demonstrates that you're committed to your vision of a unified empire, whatever the personal cost. And as word spreads throughout the eastern provinces that the great Alexander has taken a local wife, resistance begins to crumble in places where military force alone had failed. But even as you're solving problems in the west, new challenges emerge from the east, because you've conquered everything from the Mediterranean to the Hindu Kush. But the world doesn't end at the mountains. Beyond the Indus River lies India, a land of mystery and legend, where elephants are said to be as large as houses, and kings claim descent from the sun itself. And you've never been one to ignore unexplored territory. By the spring of 326 BCE, you're standing on the banks of the Indus River, staring across at a subcontinent that contains more people than your entire empire, more wealth than you can imagine, and military challenges that will test everything you've learned about warfare and leadership. Your army has been marching and fighting for 8 years now. They've crossed deserts, climbed mountains, and conquered enemies from the Aegean Sea to the roof of the world. They've made you the most powerful man who has ever lived, and they've made themselves the richest soldiers in history. They've also reached the end of their endurance. But you're just getting started. Because India isn't just another conquest. It's validation of everything you've believed since childhood, that there truly are no limits to what Alexander can achieve, no borders that can contain Macedonian ambition, no challenges that can break the will of a man who refuses to accept the word impossible. The only question is whether your men still believe in impossibility as much as you do. The answer comes when you call an assembly to announce your plans for the conquest of India. Your soldiers gather in the shadow of the Himalayas, veterans of more battles than most men could survive, loaded with enough Persian gold to buy small kingdoms, looking forward to the day when they can finally go home and enjoy the fruits of their service. Instead, you tell them that the greatest adventure still lies ahead. You speak of India's riches, of kingdoms that make Persia look poor, of elephants and temples and cities built from solid gold. You paint a picture of conquest so glorious that it will make everything they've accomplished so far seem like mere preparation. They listen in absolute silence, and when you finish speaking, that silence stretches until it becomes uncomfortable, then ominous, then downright dangerous. Finally, one of your veteran centurions, a man whose scars tell the story of every battle you fought, stands up and says the words that change everything. "No, Your Majesty, we're going home." It's mutiny, not the kind that involves violence or threats, but something much more effective: collective refusal to continue. Your entire army, the men who followed you across the known world, have simply decided that they've gone far enough. They don't question your right to command them. They don't challenge your authority or your vision. They just make it clear that they won't take another step east, no matter what orders you give or what punishments you threaten. For 3 days, you try everything: speeches about glory and duty, promises of wealth beyond imagination, threats about the consequences of disobedience, appeals to their loyalty and friendship. Nothing works. They've made up their minds, and not even Alexander the Great can change them. On the 4th day, you do something that shocks everyone, including yourself. You give in. Standing before your assembled army, you announce that the campaign is over. You'll establish a few more cities, secure your eastern borders, and then begin the march home. India can wait for another day, another king, another army with the stomach for impossible conquests. Your men cheer with the kind of enthusiasm they haven't shown since Gaugamela, but you don't join in the celebration, because for the first time in your life, you've been forced to accept limits, and that acceptance feels like a kind of death. The march back west becomes a fighting retreat through some of the most hostile territory on Earth. Not because your enemies are pursuing you, they're too busy celebrating your departure to organize effective pursuit, but because the land itself seems determined to kill you. You choose to return through the Gedrosian desert, partly because it's the most direct route to Babylon, but mostly because you can't resist the challenge. The desert has defeated every army that's ever tried to cross it, including a Persian force under Cyrus the Great himself. Naturally, you think you can do better. You can't. The Gedrosian desert nearly accomplishes what no enemy army has ever managed. It destroys Alexander's invincible forces. For 60 days, your army struggles across a wasteland where the sun burns by day and the cold cuts to the bone by night, where water is more precious than gold, and every mile costs lives that can never be replaced. Men die of thirst within sight of dried wells. Horses collapse and are left behind to feed the vultures. Supply wagons are abandoned when their wheels sink into sand that shifts like water. Through it all, you march with your men, sharing their dangers and their privations. When water runs short, you pour your ration into the sand rather than drink while your soldiers suffer. When the heat becomes unbearable, you walk instead of riding, your feet bleeding through worn sandals like the humblest foot soldier. It's leadership by example, taken to its logical extreme, and it saves your army's morale, even as the desert destroys their bodies. They may be dying, but they're dying beside a king who's willing to die with them. When you finally emerge from the desert with perhaps half the men you entered with, you're no longer quite the same person who marched out of Macedonia 12 years before. The young man who thought he could conquer the world has been replaced by someone who understands that some victories cost more than they're worth. But you're still Alexander, still the king, still responsible for an empire that stretches across 3 continents and includes more different peoples than any ruler in history has ever governed. The question is, what do you do with it now? The answer, as it turns out, is try to turn it into something permanent, something that will outlast you and continue growing long after your bones have turned to dust. You spend the last years of your life not conquering new territories, but building the infrastructure that will hold your conquests together. Roads that connect Syria to Sogdiana, cities that serve as centers of trade and learning, a legal system that combines the best of Greek, Persian, and Babylonian law. Most controversially, you begin actively promoting marriages between your Macedonian officers and Persian noblewomen. If the empire is going to survive, you believe, it needs a ruling class that has ties to both East and West, children who can speak Greek and Persian with equal fluency, administrators who understand both Aristotelian logic and Zoroastrian theology. Your veterans hate it, of course. They didn't follow you across the world to have their children raised as half barbarians. But you persist, because you can see something they can't. A future where the divisions between Greek and Persian, European and Asian, conqueror and conquered simply don't matter anymore. It's a vision of unity that's centuries ahead of its time, and it might have worked if you'd had a few more decades to implement it. Instead, you have less than 2 years. The end comes not from enemy action or battlefield wounds, but from something much more mundane: fever. You fall ill in Babylon in the spring of 3023 BCE, probably from malaria or typhoid, diseases that kill common soldiers and great kings with equal efficiency. For 11 days, you burn with fever while your physicians try every treatment known to medical science. Your generals take turns sitting by your bedside, hoping for some sign of recovery, some indication that their invincible leader will once again cheat death. On June 13th, 323 BCE, Alexander the Great dies in Babylon, in the same palace where Nebuchadnezzar once ruled an empire that seemed eternal. You're 32 years old, master of the largest empire in human history, and you leave behind no clear heir except a half-brother who's mentally disabled, and an unborn child in Roxane's womb. Your last words, according to legend, are spoken when your generals ask who should inherit your empire. To the strongest, you whisper, and then you're gone. Within hours of your death, your empire begins tearing itself apart as your former friends and trusted lieutenants start the wars that will divide your conquests among themselves and ultimately destroy everything you built. But that's tomorrow's tragedy. Today, lying in a golden bed in the heart of Babylon, you die as you lived, the man who refused to accept limits, who turned impossible into inevitable, who proved that with enough courage, intelligence, and sheer bloody-minded determination, one person really can change the world. The boy who tamed Bucephalus has become the king who tamed continents. The student who learned from Aristotle has become the teacher whose lessons will be studied for millennia. The prince who couldn't be contained by Macedonia has become the legend that no grave can hold. Alexander the Great is dead, but Alexander the Eternal, the dream of unity, the vision of a world without borders, the idea that human ambition need acknowledge no limits, will live forever in the minds of everyone who ever dared to believe that they too might achieve the impossible. Your body may rest in a golden sarcophagus, but your spirit rides on with every explorer who ventures into unknown lands, every leader who dreams of uniting divided peoples, every young person who looks at the world and thinks, I can do better. You are Alexander, you are the storm that remade the ancient world, and though your mortal life has ended, Your legend has only just begun, in the words that will echo through history long after your empire has crumbled and your cities have fallen to dust. There is nothing you cannot accomplish, no height you cannot reach, no dream too large for those bold enough to chase it to the very edge of the world and beyond. Sleep well, Alexander. You've earned it.